we've been talking about the Jeffrey Epstein stuff, how the president saying that he would consider a pardon or he wouldn't rule it out, or reiterating that he has the power. But what he didn't do is he didn't say no when asked if he would consider a pardon for Ghislaine Maxwell. So we don't even need to put words in his mouth. He didn't say no, and he said he had the power to do it if he wanted to. Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, for his part, said it would give him great pause. One of those real, it's, from the Susan Collins, I have real concern about this bill or this nominee answer. It would give the Speaker great pause. Tell me why that's a bad place for the Speaker to be, if you believe so.
Okay. Well, first off, the update I have from today is Trump in Scotland, where he is right now, many people may know, saying when he was asked again, the Ghislaine Maxwell pardon question, said, well, that would be basically inappropriate to talk about now. All right. And then so that just sort of continues the narrative, Michael, that I think you're laying out. So let me just quickly say this about that. To quote a long time ago vice president who you probably know, but most people probably won't. Anyway, so let's go on. Threading the needle on this Epstein thing, as you well know, is exceptionally difficult for people like Trump, Mike Johnson, et cetera. It's just a political problem for them. And it's not going to go away anytime soon. It's the MAGA base saying, wait a minute. For some of us, and I'll have some numbers on that in just a moment, but like some of us, this was really important during the campaign. You kind of are almost, guaranteed this to us. And now you say it ain't going to happen. What the heck? All right. Now, interestingly, the numbers on that have just come out in terms of the polling are really interesting, Michael. Only about 10% of the MAGA base, the Trump supporters, have said this is a really important issue to them. The other 90% are like, okay, listen, I'm really happy about the tax cuts, and go down the list of the other stuff, right? Border and all that. So we'll see where this plays out. But right now, for a guy like Mike Johnson, this is really difficult because not only is he dealing with the MAGA base, more importantly for him is the math in his own chamber, right? And he cannot afford to alienate half a dozen people. Now, people go, yeah, but Mike's self-professed, I heard in the leading Christian guy, and many people have a great deal of respect for Mike Johnson, even people on the other side of the aisle who say this is a real kind of, stand-up, humble kind of a guy. But he's dealing with the political realities in the House of Representatives now, where he is skating on the most microscopic thin of ice. So there's that. As far as Trump goes, who knows? He came out today and said, apparently, well, yeah, I got invited to the island, but I said no, I never went. That's the new update from him on the so-called Epstein Island story. So I don't know where this is going to end up, Michael, except to say it really does put especially Mike Johnson in a tough bind. Does it directly affect Trump? Not nearly as directly.
Yeah, that's true. I remember, I mean, I shouldn't say I remember when, because that sounds silly. Most of the time, the role of the Speaker of the House is to, especially if they have the majority, but if they don't, it's to get the majority. It's to hold their majority, right? Is to make, before anything, we don't care what happens in the White House. I want to be the Speaker. I want to be the president of this body, essentially. If the president of the United States is from a different party, so be it. But we want our power here in the House of Representatives, where we punch the clock every day. Has that changed, Gary, in your estimation? Is an adherence to this president, does that carry more currency even than holding on to your majority in 2026?
Well, interestingly, Michael, I think more and more those two things have converged. Mm-hmm. What do I mean? That is allegiance to Trump, or at least staying real close, right, to Donald Trump, has become the ticket to keeping the majority in the House for the most part, right? I mean, that is simply the truth. It's really interesting when you drill down on the numbers on this. There are only 3 districts in the Republican caucus that were won by Kamala Harris. All the rest were won by Donald Trump. So we talk about purple districts, and in terms of partisan makeup in some of these districts, that is very true. There are some purple districts, more than people usually talk about. But in terms of actual winners of the districts, if you're not aligned with Trump, you're probably not going to win. That's what the numbers tell us, right? And now we know that Nebraska and Kentucky's, been taken on by Trump. I mean, so that is the reality. And I think it's really, really interesting that, to your point, Michael, I mean, guys like Tip O'Neill, he was a force unto himself. I mean,
Right.
when he was Speaker of the House, he was a. I mean, some people thought him as powerful as the occupant of the White House, but
Yeah.
now in the current political milieu, and Nancy Pelosi, she kind of towed her own line. She didn't really feel like she had to do the bidding of a Biden White House or even an Obama White House to retain her power. But that is different right now.
Yeah, and that is interesting. I mean, I think in terms of political changes, things that we accepted as the norm, and whether it's anomalous to this guy, which I think a lot of people are hoping that this is a this presidency, this president, this person, this political figure is an anomaly rather than a change and what will become normal. I don't know that that's true, and we won't know for quite a while, but has this part of politics changed? Because it's a fascinating, but for people who follow the House and the Senate and those elections, their own power is something that they like very much. And when you see that change and become almost co-opted or partnered with the White House in a way that it never has been. But the numbers you say are true, those 3 districts, though I think several of those went from 2020 to 24 became red from purple or even from blue. And also, we shouldn't underestimate the power of losing 3 seats to Mike Johnson either. I mean, if those districts did go, that's how tenuous his hold is right now on this. So that has to be put in, right?
Yeah, and I would say the closest analogy we have in modern political history to where I think we are now, which has alignment with the White House is the way to keep your majority if you're a Republican in the House, was the Ronald Reagan days, right? I
Right.
mean, Ronald Reagan's had that kind of sway, and people are now beginning to say, they're vastly different in so many different ways, but
Right.
their impact on keeping the Congress. Trump is as close to Reagan as anybody we've seen. You could not be a Republican. You know this, Michael. You
Of
could
course.
not be a Republican, even running for dog catcher, and not say Ronald Reagan is the man, right?
Well, yeah, that's absolutely true. But the different dynamic there was that many Democrats would say that, and you wouldn't find very many Democrats saying that about Donald Trump. So Reagan not only had the sway over all of the Republicans, but there were Democrats who were afraid to go against Reagan as well
Well,
because of
that's
how
true.
popular it was.
There is one other interesting thing that I'm just watching carefully, Michael, and you remember because the term Reagan Democrat
Yeah.
emerged after 1980. All right, that was never a thing in the 70s or the 60s. All of a sudden, Ronald Reagan sweeps into massive power, has a historic, electoral college win, as you know, in 1984, and then all of a sudden this whole the blue dog Democrat and the Reagan Democrat, and we got to change the way we approach our working class base. All of a sudden we're hearing that again, right? That refrain that we've lost our blue dog Democrats, our Reagan Democrats. You're hearing that from a lot of especially moderate parts of the Democratic Party. So they are vastly different. I don't want to equate Trump and
Of
Reagan
course.
more
Yeah.
broadly, but just in terms of raw politics, that kind of allegiance and alliance is what we're seeing now more so than we have since then.
Yeah, that there's no question. And I think there are many people that think that Joe Biden won in 2020 because he sort of portrayed himself as a Reagan Democrat out there, that he was the person who could appeal to the classic white working class voter who went to Donald Trump in 2016. It worked. He was right. Whatever, the circumstances were, every election has its own circumstances, maybe not as bizarre as a pandemic, but nonetheless, every election does have its circumstances. Well, it has its well if it weren't for the circumstance, right? But I still think that's basically how Biden won, was to be that kind of Reagan Democrat, and yeah, we're never going to see that again. While we're talking, I want to get into some other things too. I want to talk about Governor Newsom. I want to talk a little bit about a few other things. But while we're on the Congress, I think it's worth noting that former governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper, or if you're from there, Roy Cupper, is running now for the U.S. Senate for the seat of the retiring Tom Tillis. And that matters, doesn't it, Gary?
Oh, it matters a lot because it's 53-47 right now in the U.S. Senate, right? There's a 3-vote margin. People forget that Senator Thune, the head of the Republicans in the Senate, he's got a smaller majority than Mike Johnson does. Now, he doesn't have 435 cats in his chamber he's trying to herd like Mike Johnson does. He's only got 100 total. Okay.
Right.
But he's only got, so let's, you do the math. All right. You do Susan Collins, you do Murkowski of Alaska, two never can be guaranteed votes when it comes to conservative measures. That's just their politics. All right. Part of it, Susan Collins' constituency in Maine. But you lose one of the, you lose one of the three. Now you're down only to two. Now that makes it difficult. And you just look at history here in the first 6 months of Trump 2.0, Michael. Vance has had to go over down Pennsylvania Avenue and cast tie-breaking votes on more than one occasion. That's right. How close that is. So you are exactly right. Roy Cooper was very popular as a governor, two terms in North Carolina. Now, some people say his time has passed, that in the Trump 2.0 era, he may not have quite the luster he did, but he was the dream candidate for the Democrats. And Chuck Schumer could not be more excited today. I'm sure there's champagne corks being popped all over the mimosas in his office. And they are thrilled. They're thrilled this is going to happen. They think they have now a really, really good shot to peel off at least one Republican in the Senate, which, by the way, given the math we probably don't have time to go into today, would be a big deal because the Democrats have a tough slog in the Senate in 26.
Yeah, they definitely do. And they would be helped. It's ironic, too, I think, when the Democrats are talking about getting younger and younger, their leading candidate in Maine against Susan Collins is Janet Mills, right, who's in her, I think, mid to late 70s, and Roy Cooper is almost 70. And so that the whole youth movement thing, when it comes down to practical politics in those states, they're showing that seems to be the most practical way to go in terms of getting back to these majorities.
Yeah, you can rest assured, Michael, if those two candidates you just mentioned for the Democrats do not prevail in Maine and North Carolina, it is going to throw gasoline on that fire for Democrats. We got to go young. This is not working.
Yeah, that is really true. And I think fascinating too, because that's something that people are watching very closely within the Democratic Party more than from outside. I think it's something that Democrats are paying attention to more than anybody, because the other parties don't seem to concern themselves with the kind of demographic politics or the politics of age and whatnot. It's just about what would be the most effective way to win. And I guess we'll also see by what happens in the mayor's race in New York to a lesser extent. I'm not, I don't know that everything isn't a bellwether, even though it gives us something to talk about. But I do think that would tell us a little bit about the behavior of the party, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've hit on a really important point, Michael, and that is this whole focus on youth, kind of led by AOC and a number of others. Why is it important? Because they pinned their hope in 24 on the youth vote. And of course, that really came to the fore during the Obama years. It's like, wow, these people that, frankly, this, Michael, they were ignored for the most part in electoral politics because they weren't seen like as a reliable vote. Now they talk, they have demonstrations, but they don't go to the polls. Well, when they started seeing numbers that show up that actually help them, then that turned it around. So in the aftermath of 24, of course, they said when Kamala Harris's numbers right there, especially among young males, started really dropping, they said, we got to do something about this, and we got to do it fast. And that's why all the talk about the youth movement inside the Democratic Party. Yeah,
it's really interesting, and it's something that we'll follow. But I think it's worth following because it's such an unpredictable dynamic. It always has been, the youth vote, and for Democrats to only pin their hopes on that, it'll be interesting to see how that works. We talked, Gary, about politics earlier in the show when we were talking about Epstein, talking about Tulsi Gabbard, talking about deflecting. It's one of the oldest, what do? You go in and you bomb, you start a war in Grenada when you're not happy about how things are going with the Iran-Contra hearings, perhaps. And I may have that chronology wrong, but those sorts of things are very, very typical of the whole wag the dog scenario thing. So I see Tulsi Gabbard going after Barack Obama as a deflection of attention from the Jeffrey Epstein case, and now Trump himself talking about Bill Clinton. Let's not talk about me even within the Epstein case, because this is about my enemy. This is about the person who has worked against me. Now Gavin Newsom, who is a rising star in the Democratic Party. I mean, he's obviously a fixture here in California, but in terms of national politics, he certainly wants to be that rising star. he is taking on the Epstein story, and he's going to Trump. And I think we have sound of this, if I'm not mistaken, but he's talking about Trump being, I think he used the word unmoored, and this isn't the Trump we've come to know. Whether or not that presumes that he was previously moored, I don't know. But let's do we have we have sound on this? Let's
What's
listen
your
to
reaction to the fact that he is still perpetuating this lie?
Well, he's lying to cover up his prior lies, and then lying again. Now he doesn't even know truth from fiction. And so, look, he's caught it red-handed. He's in the files. We know it. Period. Full stop. That's not even academic. We know he's in the files. We know what this is all about. He told Pam Bondi, not to move forward. It's the idea that he has to fire her. He should step down himself if he fires her, because he directed her not to release these files. I always assumed that. Now we know that she briefed him. So he's lying. He's part of this cover-up. And he has confused even the most ardent observers here. I mean, you can't, the guy's a pretzel on this issue. Every hour he contradicts a statement.
You got the Olympics coming in California.
So, you have a prominent Democrat who's trying to be a nationally prominent Democrat talking about this, and, breaking down the fact that he seizes on one thing here, Gary, and I think anyone who's going to run for the presidency on the Democratic side is going to be doing this next time, which is to go after places where Trump is vulnerable within his own constituency, within his own support. Good tactic?
Well, I mean, he sort of laid the groundwork. That is Gavin Newsom for this, right? When all of a sudden he became the darling of the conservative podcast this year, much to the chagrin, as you know, of people in his own party. They're like, what in the world are you inviting Charlie Kirk on your podcast for? Why are you going on XYZ podcast? I mean, he has confused a lot of people, especially inside his own party, especially when he said things like, I think it's, deeply unfair for men to be competing or boys to be competing in girls' sports. And they're like, wait a minute. Was that Gavin Newsom, our guy, saying that? So he's been confusing a lot of people, but his strategy, I think, Michael, has been exceptionally interesting and exceptionally different. Remember, over the last couple of years, he spent a lot of time in red states. He was down in Texas. He was in Florida. He was debating Ron DeSantis on Sean Hannity's show, of all places. He was putting up billboards in Texas and Florida. He started a PAC with $10 million running ads in these red states. So it's a really, really interesting strategy. Most people, when they're running for the presidency, are concerned about one thing: locking down their own base, which means you sort of paddled, to quote Richard Nixon, on the left side of the canoe, right? Not the right side of the canoe. But his strategy has been really interesting, which is, look, I am the guy. I'm the fighter. I'm not afraid to go into the lion's den. That has been, I think, what has set him apart more than anything else. And what some Democrats in his party really love. Others are still saying, hey, what gives with this guy? Is he really true blue, or is he more purple than he wants to let on?
Well, yeah, and I think that he is relying on his probably well-earned bona fides as a leader on social issues, which is easier to do from the mayor's office in San Francisco and the governor's office in Sacramento than it is in many parts of the country. But there's no question what you're saying is absolutely true. And it's a tactic that, look, if he succeeds, people will point to, and if he fails, people will point to also as the reason. He's doing it in a macro way and in a micro way. He says he's going to go into red counties in California and talk to those voters as well. He said that after the 24 election. I don't know if that has happened, if he's going to do that, or if it is the best use of his time now that he's, termed out of this and going to move on to something else. I'm not sure. If I were advising him, I would say to continue doing that, but to do it in a macro way in red counties around the country, that probably makes some sense in terms of who the Democratic Party has to woo in this next election, whether it's for him or for a different candidate. And then I think that one of the other parts of what we're seeing in terms of the Trump stuff, the Maxwell stuff, the Epstein stuff, is how Trump is deflecting here, and Tulsi Gabbard has been a big part of that. Jason Crow, a congressman from Colorado, said that there is nothing to what she is doing, what Tulsi Gabbard is doing, other than what we have said, which is as a distraction here, that there's nothing to what she is saying about those about what was in those files and what we know, and to accuse a former president of treason, which I mentioned earlier, treason punishable by death in this country. And so you could in a way infer that from these. But what do you think is behind all of this Gabbard stuff?
Well, there's all kinds of theories floating around about this. I'll tick them down super fast, Michael. One is this was another sort of background promise made by the Trump folks during the campaign, right? Listen, and Trump, of course, he hasn't let go of this in years, right? The Russia collusion hoax, this is now getting close to 10 years old. I mean, when this first started, right? And it's like, and the base has always believed the president that, this was completely made up, et cetera, et cetera. So one could see it sort of like the Epstein deal as sort of a tertiary issue floating around out there in MAGA world. And, and Gabbard's, laid hold of it on behalf of the president, maybe her own political leanings and career, and now is running with it. Other people say, hey, remember, she kind of got in the doghouse earlier this year with Trump. And he said, well, I really don't care what she has to say about various issues. And this is sort of a redemptive tour of, look, I'm going to take on an issue near and dear to the president, though it has almost no real bearing in in his current political environment, but it's become nearly ancient history for most people in Washington in terms of its real impact. So we'll see where this goes. Is it totally a smokescreen on Epstein? I had a feeling, I started wondering when both of these were going to surface, right? When's Russia going to really bubble to the surface? When Epstein really going to bubble to the surface? And interestingly, for the first 6 months, they really didn't. They were kind of in the background, Michael. And now all of a sudden it's happening. I will say this. I think there's a lot of concern, both inside the Congress and some even inside the White House quietly, to get off of these two issues, because they are not, there's a real belief they're not going to do anything for those men and women that have to run in the midterm next year, that they're net negatives, that they distract from what people believe. And this, every presidency deals with this. You feel like you have successes, be it on whatever, okay, tariffs, on the border, whatever, the big things, and you don't want these things to be distractions. That's famously what people said about things like, Clinton's dealing with, what was the name? Remember the murdered lawyer in Arkansas?
Oh, yeah, Vince Foster.
Yeah, Vince Foster. And then, of course, for Reagan, it was the Iran-Contra. I mean, these are the kind of things that can really trip up a presidency. And I don't mean to minimize Vince Foster. I'm just saying that was sitting out there. And, of course, Monica Lewinsky eclipsed that. Those are the things that people who have to run in 18 months or now 14, 15 months don't want to have center stage.
Yeah. Yeah. And the good fortune that people have with Jeffrey Epstein here is that everybody knows who he is, where Vince Foster was more of an anonymous figure. Both were suicides. Both were suicides that were questioned. But by the same token, I think Epstein is more part of the political parlance than the other. Let's, before we let you go, though, talk about something that Donald Trump, that some people are saying may be a victory for Donald Trump, which is what was announced in Scotland, or in Europe, I guess. I think it happened in Scotland, actually, where that 15% tariffs were agreed upon. And how is this something that Republicans and the president should and could ballyhoo? I'm saying these tariffs went from 30 to 20 to 15. So is that really a big victory for Trump?
Well, the reason it's a big victory in their mind is a couple of reasons. One is because of the things that went along with it. Trump has, again, like he did with the Japanese deal, touted the hundreds of billions of dollars of investment that are going to come to the U.S. along with the tariff deal. Now, that's not guaranteed by the governments in the EU. People should know that. That would be private sector stuff. And there's people wondering, okay, how much of this is really going to materialize? There's other pieces of it, like opening up the European market to certain American products, that hasn't happened in the past. And that, by the way, was a big part of the Japanese deal, too. A lot of closure of their markets to American products for a whole variety of reasons. Sometimes it's specification. Sometimes it's real nitty gritty stuff about, well, your rice has to be this type of rice. Believe it or not, that's true for Japan. So here's the deal. I think right now, Republicans are seeing these tariff boxes being checked as real net positives. Because remember, the big deadline, the supposed hard and fast deadline for Trump on tariffs comes this Saturday on the 2nd of August. And, apparently the EU was getting darn concerned that Trump, like it or not, would be at least semi-serious and go ahead and impose 30% tariffs on their products, which would truly have been devastating for a lot of things. Think about a car, Mercedes or something else going up by a third overnight. So that was a concern. Now, the long term of this, Michael, is going to be the real question mark. We have not, as you know, seen a big uptick in inflation because of the tariffs. That was the big early concern. The stock market is doing well. That seems to have settled down. Wall Street's not concerned. This is going to get out of control at this point anyway. But we're going to see. I mean, the tariff, what I'm hearing is this. $20 billion in additional monthly revenue so far to the federal government from the new tariffs. $20 billion. That's almost $250 billion a year in new revenue. But the big question is, what happens as of next year, they say, when the tariffs really take effect? Will that inflation then grab hold in a very non-convenient, important midterm election year?
I'm going to channel John McLaughlin and say you're all wrong except for Gary, who got it right. And the only thing that matters right now is what happens to the economy next year. The economy, if it's stable, is good for the Republicans, and that's all that matters. So yeah.
Hey, Michael, that's an outstanding McLaughlin, by the way, my friend.
All right, thank you very much. I don't think there's a big market for it, but I appreciate it. Gary, thanks for spending time with us today. I think we're all smarter because of it, and there's so much to talk about politically, but I think that we're talking about the biggest parts of what's going on, and that is the holding majorities in the Senate and the House, seeing what these tariffs do to the economy, and so far all the predictions of doom haven't panned out, which in and of itself is really the victory in all of this for Trump, as loath as a lot of people who listen to the show want to hear that. But sometimes facts are facts, and we won't know until later on. So Gary, thanks for being with the show, as you always are on Mondays, and hopefully I sub in on a Monday again, and we can do this again.
Thanks, Michael. You always do a great job. Have a great show.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. And Gary Dietrich segment, as we know, is sponsored by Bill Campbell at Bill Campbell's at Remax Gold. If you're relocating into or from Northern California, you need a highly respected real estate professional like Bill Campbell of Remax Gold. Call Bill or text Bill at 530-448-7474. You can call or text him again, 530-448-7474. And that's why we have Gary Dietrich, and that's why we all benefit from Bill Campbell and Remax Gold.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.